Hello, everyone. Danny here with Question Pro. I'm excited for our next episode here for MRX Unplugged. This episode is about crosstab and correlation analysis in market research. Super sexy topic. I'm joined today by my fellow co-hosts. We are starting off with Chris. We'll go with Crystal and then Dan. Please introduce yourself, Chris.
Hi there. So I'm Chris Robson. I'm the VP of Managed Services here at Question Pro. And think of me as the tame geek. I've been working in the insights industry for many, many years. I'm a mathematician by background. So I love this stuff. So I'm looking forward to talking about, as you say, super sexy subject. Actually, it's a very interesting subject. So hopefully we'll be able to convince people.
I love that. Hi, guys. I'm Crystal Weiss. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Question Pro, and I have very little to add to this topic other than my bright, shiny personality. I'm here to operate as all the watchers and viewers who don't know what Chris and Dan are going to talk about. I'll be...
Well, I was just going to be here to hear from Chris, actually, so that's what I'm here. Hey, everyone.
So we're all here to hang out with Chris.
Yeah, that's it. I'm here to learn from Chris. Dan Fleetwood, President of Research and Insights here at Question Pro, and excited to dive into crosstabs and correlation.
I'm very excited as well. So from the research that I've done, it is two techniques that are the bread and butter of data analysis that helps us uncover relationships, patterns, and actionable insights, the favorite word. So we're just going to break down some of the basics here for anyone, that may or may not be familiar with the topic. We like to cover a wide variety of walks of life because that's what we're all about. So, Chris, since you are the subject matter expert, would you mind explaining for anyone that, might not be familiar what crosstab and correlation analysis is?
Yeah, absolutely. And, crosstabs have been around since the beginning of market research data, going right back to the 60s. And when we first started collecting quantitative data, and the question was always, well, if I've collected all this data, how do I organize it in a way that can help me understand things about the data? And a crosstab, at its simplest, is really just a table which crosses one thing, usually a question or something that we've asked, against another set of things, which is usually things about the people who answered the questions. So maybe things like age or gender or things like that. Who are they? And the main reason, and that seems very obvious and very simple that we would want to do that, but the main thing we're trying to do when we put together a crosstab is say, how did different groups of people answer things differently? And I say this is important because it's not just any old question versus any old question. Okay, a mistake that a lot of people make when they do these things is just say, oh, it's just about putting any question versus any question. No, it's about saying, how are people answering differently? And so therefore, how do we split the people up first? And then how do we split how those different groups of people answered things differently? So you have to kind of step back, and I'm sure we'll go deeper into this as we talk about this, but you have to kind of think about things in that way. And we have names and words that we use that we'll go into in a bit. But it's really being very methodical about the way we create that table. So it's not just any old table. And then secondly, correlation analysis, and again, we'll go into this in more depth, but that's about how do things move together, okay? And so, for instance, if I believe one thing, is there something else that's different that I might also believe in, okay? And those things move together. So things that are highly correlated are things that tend to move together. And we see this a lot when we're thinking about people's attitudes to things. And we see this a lot when we talk about things, whether it be politics or spending or anything that people do. There tend to be indicators that if people do one thing, they're likely to do another thing, and that's correlation.
So
And
that's
we-
kind of how the crosstabs and the correlation work together. Is you divide someone into, okay, these are how certain groups of people are responding, and then we can kind of see the correlation of the decisions they're going to make.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
We're learning.
One thing that's interesting, Chris, you mentioned with crosstabs, like it's been around since the 60s, right? It's like tried and true method, and even with all of the new AI that we're coming out with, and all these new fancy things that we can do with data. At the end of the day, I feel like researchers just want their damn crosstabs, right? Like that's what they want. Like, I mean, they want all the other flashy stuff and do all these things, but hey, where are my crosstabs, buddy? Like that's what they're really after. So it's always funny to me.
Absolutely, and I think that sometimes there's a little bit of false snobbery in the insights area where we say, oh, well, we can do more complex techniques. And the reality is, yes, we can. And we love doing more complex techniques. But you want to get your basics right. And the basics like crosstabs, the basics like correlation, you want to get those right. And sometimes a simple crosstab can be the most insightful thing and really tell you what's going on with your audience, with your data. In ways that a more complex analysis might not actually do. So it's not that these are simple and so therefore you should move on from them and do something more complex. And it's also not that complex things are not valuable. They are sometimes. But it's getting the basics right. And I think that if you start by getting the basics like the crosstabs right, then that's a great foundation for then doing more analysis and more complex analysis.
Yeah, I mean, it is a great way to look at the data, right? It almost goes back to the old adage, like if it's don't broke, if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? Or however that goes. I might have messed that up. But,
You got it.
But it's a great way to look at data, and as you mentioned, you can get pretty complex even with crosstabs as well. So that's really cool.
Do you have to intentionally think about how you set up your survey at the top when you're programming it, and when you're like, oh, I want to use crosstabs for my insights or my dashboarding, so do I need to set up my survey a specific way kind of from the get-go? I'm assuming that makes it more successful.
Absolutely. And one of the important things here is to ask yourself before you set up the survey, how do I want to think about the people who are answering these questions? How do I want to group them? Are you working in a category where gender might be important, where maybe the attitudes between women and men may be an important thing? In some categories that is, in some categories it's not. Okay, so you have to think about things like that, and then maybe, and where this actually affects things is you'll then have to think about in your sample, do you want to make sure that your sample is well balanced? Okay, between men and women when you're actually taking them. And so typically, when you think about the things, what are the main groupings? Maybe it's age grouping. Okay, maybe you want to get a good balance of people under 40 versus over 40. Maybe you want to get a good balance of people who currently use a particular type of product versus those who don't currently use a particular type of product. So all of those things are things that you might want to think about grouping your respondents by. And so you have to think about that right up front so that you can make sure that you have enough of each. Very often, when we're planning sample, we will say, let's make sure we have at least a certain number of users versus non-users, purely so that you can make sure you've got enough sample that when you do the crosstab, when you do the splits, you've got enough in each column that you can make meaningful statistical inference from them.
Because it would be like, oh, if we're going to research who goes to see the band Fish, Fish is a band, right? Yes.
Fish is a band.
And we're gonna get thanks. I was trying to think of it's gonna be slightly insulting here in a second.
Something that we would know.
If you're gonna go see, here's a better one, because I also like them. If you're gonna go see the band Kansas, there is definitely a certain group of people that are going to go see it, but then you might have outliers like me who would also go see it or know the people in it, or, you know, but you can't necessarily crosstab 10 people my age and 100 people not my age.
Exactly. If you wanted to know, for instance, you know, so maybe the question you're trying to answer is, you know, what's the appeal of a band that's been around for a while like Kansas amongst younger people, is because, you know, and this is a big deal at the moment because we know that there are lots of older bands that are becoming really popular with younger people through TikTok. You know, they get used in a meme and all of a sudden.
Dude, now you're speaking Danny's language.
I understand.
Yeah.
Also, I think we might have lost Dan.
I know, Dan looks very frozen.
He does.
I'll go ahead and
keep going.
take him down for a sec while he comes back, so he's not staring into our
No problem. No. So, but that's a great example of where you say, if what you're trying to understand is their new appeal amongst this band for younger people, you would want to make sure that you had enough sample, that you'd spoke to enough people in your survey who were under 40 or however you were splitting it.
Yeah, that's a great, and Chris, that's also like a great insight. Like, you're going to get yourself an invite back, bringing up a TikTok reference.
Well, there's actually been quite a lot of this where, you know, older band. I mean, so for instance, it was funny a couple of years ago when there was the Stranger Things, the series 4, which used the Kate Bush, and of course Kate Bush is from my era, and I'm an old guy. Okay,
I know what you're talking about.
And all of a sudden, Kate Bush became one of the most popular artists on the planet amongst younger people because of Stranger Things and because of all the TikTok things that happened around there, where people were, you know, recreating running up that hill and things like that. So we do see things like that, and that's why sometimes, and this is a great example of where, if you were looking at what, you know, where is the appeal of an artist like Kate Bush. And if you wanted to know where that was amongst age groups, that would be a great use for a crosstab. And you would just want to make sure that you had enough sample in each of the age groups that you could say something meaningful about it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That is pretty cool. And
I only brought up the band Kansas because I am from Kansas, and I know one of the original guitarists.
Oh, really?
That's
It's
awesome.
my default,
Yeah.
it's my default like vintage band.
So we did talk about Kate Bush. Would you say that is maybe like one of the unexpected insights that cross tabulation provided, or do you have any other examples?
So basically, when you do a crosstab, like I say, you're looking for differences. Crosstabs are not interesting if everything's the same. Okay. And, you know, and that's why what we do is we say, first of all, how do we want to break up our audience? How do we want to break up how we look at our audience? And then what are the things we want to know that might be different amongst those groups? And sometimes, you know, so for instance, I mentioned the thing about gender, and the gender one's an interesting one because it's kind of something that everybody does, but it's not always relevant. And sometimes you really just don't see differences, okay? Because it's about being a human being, not about being, you know, a woman or a man or whatever. What we need to do is we need to say, when we do these things, and Dan is back. Hey there, Dan.
Hello, Dan.
I'm back. Crystal jinxed me. My power actually blipped for a minute. So.
Oh no!
So it's these things about saying, how might we want to break up our audience, and then what do we want to know, and we're looking for interesting differences. Right. And that's where kind of the next level of things comes up in crosstabs when we talk about statistical testing, which is there are a series of statistical tests.
Do we talk about statistical testing, Chris?
We do.
We do.
Really?
but and basically, at its simplest, statistical testing can get horribly complex. And even me as a mathematician and somebody who's worked in statistics for many, many years, I often have to look things up and remind myself which test to use in which case and things like this. However, the simple way of looking at the statistical test is to say, when you see a difference between two columns, so say you saw that, 67% of people over 40 like something and 64% of people under 40 like something, and then the question is, does that mean anything? Is there really a difference here? And all the statistical tests do is say to us whether we can say, yes, there really is a difference between that 64%, 67% is a meaningful difference, or statistical difference. I've got to be careful with the words here. Statistical difference. Or is it just that there's enough variation that you would expect to see differences like that, even if the underlying populations were the same? So the way to think about stats tests is very simply is to say, is there really a difference here?
Yeah.
Okay. Or is it just the way that the numbers go up and down a little bit? That's all we're seeing. So it gets a lot more complex than that. I'm not going to pretend to get into it. Certainly in today's discussion, we won't get into the depths of statistical testing. But that's one of the valuable things about crosstabs, is that when we can do statistical tests between the columns, we can say, is there really a difference or not here?
Chris, what's your favorite confidence interval on crosstabs? I know you have one.
So the favorite confidence interval is definitely p equals 0.05 or 5%. People will actually usually say that's pretty much the standard that people use when they do things at the moment. You have to be careful. Statistical significance isn't the same as importance, and you have to be a little bit careful that you're interpreting things right. Sometimes things can fail a statistical significance test, but still be an important thing to know about.
Yeah.
Okay. And that gets very complex and probably way beyond what we want to talk about today. But generally, as a first pass, if you're not sure, if you see differences in two columns and you say, well, is this really a difference I should care about? The first thing to look at is the statistical test, the statistical significance of the difference. However, it's not the end, and that's a longer discussion.
No,
what is Dan or Chris, do you have any anecdotes on something that like made for an interesting decision from crosstabs, or like where you like went in with an assumption and then crosstabs showed you like the complete opposite? Do you have any fun stories?
Yeah. To be honest, really, almost all of the projects that I've done with quantitative data, basically, at some point, all of the interesting things pop out in the tabs, and that you see in the crosstabs. You see where the differences are. Sometimes you need other visualizations in order for it to become obvious. Like sometimes
like a circle chart.
Like a circle chart or like a bar chart or something like that.
Sorry, that's an inside joke.
Dan loves them.
Oh gosh, this is not the show for that.
Poor Chris is like, what have I walked into?
No, actually, what you say is an important point, because for those of us who are doing the analysis, the crosstabs are brilliant. However, when you want to communicate what you've seen in the crosstabs to your stakeholders, to your executives, to your customers, you probably don't want to use crosstabs.
Yeah, because if people don't teach you what the crosstabs mean, or like somebody, even in X-Day, somebody programmed our survey with like a like things were most important, but I thought one was the most important. No, one was the least important. And no one told me. And I was like, this is really weird that this person's session was like the most liked because why?
It
And it was, and nobody taught me how to read this table.
Yeah. So that's an important point there. You know, the tables, crosstabs are an analysis tool, not a presentation tool.
That's a good distinction. Yeah.
Good way to put it.
They're a tool for us to understand, those of us who are doing the analysis, the geeks like me, to look at, see what's going on, where are the differences, what are the things we need to take away from this data. However, typically, you know, 99 times out of 100, it's not the crosstab that you then show to the client or to the internal stakeholder or whatever. Instead, you say, okay, this is an interesting difference. Let's build a chart. Okay, and so thinking of it as that first layer of looking at the data, looking at where the differences are. And yeah, it's not, you probably, most stakeholders, most internal stakeholders, you know, you're not going to want to go to your CEO and say, you know, here are 100 crosstabs. There's the difference. No,
I don't think they do that.
You know, yeah. Instead, you're going to say, here's 5 slides, and 4 of those slides have charts on. Okay, and they are the most important things that we have found in our 100 crosstabs.
Yeah, cool. I remember being a young researcher, and when they would say, "Hey, you know, write the report," what I was taught to do is, you know, get your charts on there, but then use the crosstabs as a way to inform like the story and get the important points on there, right? Like that's absolutely. That seems to be like the majority of research, or not of research, but of presenting the results, is using the crosstabs to help inform the story and get those interesting points. But to your point, you know, Crystal, like put them in a way that people are going to want to read them and understand, you know, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really good segue to go into the correlation analysis portion of this. We can talk a little bit about some math here. This is something that I was trying to, you know, get some real information on. So the definition and the applications of it are that correlation measures the degree to which 2 variables move in relation to each other. It ranges from -1 to +1, with the 0 indicating no correlation. Is that correct, Chris?
That's correct, yes.
Yay!
All right, off to a good start here.
So would you mind maybe like expanding on that a little bit?
Can you break that down for regular people in the room?
Normal people.
Yeah. And so this is really about how 2 things move against each other. And so you know, we may see things like, so we started with the band examples, okay? So let's carry on with the band example.
Let's go.
You know, if we asked a bunch of people whether they loved the band Kansas, okay, which is an older band, been around for a long time, and if we looked at the correlation of that with age, it's likely to have a positive correlation where people, you know, people who are older are probably more likely to have been brought up with Kansas and love Kansas. Okay, and you know, and if you do it in the other direction, you know, say somebody like Youngblood, okay. And,
oh wow! Man, Chris, you were way cooler than I thought you were going to be.
But if you did a correlation of age against how much people like Youngblood, it's probably going to be a negative correlation.
Yes.
Okay, because it's as people get older, they're probably less likely to be Youngblood fans. And so that simple correlation is, how do the things change when they go together? So with a negative correlation, it's not that they're not correlated. That would be a 0 correlation. But with a negative correlation, as one thing increases, the other thing decreases. So probably my guess would be, if you did, you know, how much you like Youngblood versus age, that's going to be a negative correlation. If you do how much you like Kansas versus age, it's probably going to be a positive correlation. So what you're doing here is you're just seeing how things change, how things move together. Are they correlated? If there's zero correlated, it means one doesn't affect the other at all. Okay, that it doesn't matter. If something isn't correlated with age, then it means you're going to get an even response no matter how old the respondent is. So that would be zero correlation. But that's typically how correlation works.
There's one. Oh, go ahead.
Chris, don't you have to be careful with correlation though? Like,
I was going to say
correlation does equal causation, right? So how do you determine?
There's a really cool anecdote. I just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah.
There was one, I think, that you had mentioned, Dan, from like many episodes ago, where it was that when people were seeing that there was a trend that the more pies someone was buying, the stronger the indication was that there was going to be a tornado.
Yeah, I remember that.
At Walmart or something like that. So that's one
Yeah.
anecdote. But yes, please explain, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, correlation doesn't imply causation, and what we mean by that is one is not the cause of the other. They are just things that happen to move together, and when two things do move together but are not causing each other, okay, it's usually because there's something else going on, okay, and that something else is causing both of them to change. Okay, so typically, and we use the word hidden variable or latent variable to mean that there's something else going on that is the cause of what's going on, and you do have to be careful of this, because, so for instance, you know, a very common thing is when we look at, say, for instance, I'm trying to think of an example where the correlation and causation are different. So maybe something like, you know, when people look at the difference between areas and say, well, you know, this area likes Mercedes cars, okay, and also this area owns a lot of yachts, okay, and those two will be correlated, okay.
Sure.
But it's not that the ownership of Mercedes cars and the ownership of yachts are causing each other. It's not like owning yachts is causing. What it is that affluence, which is a third variable, affluence is causing those two. Okay. And so that when we say that correlation doesn't mean causation, that's exactly what we mean. That, you know, the ownership of owning a Mercedes is not going to cause you to own a yacht.
I mean,
but being affluent will make it more likely that you own a Mercedes and more likely that you own a yacht. So that's kind of what we mean when we say that. And so in that particular case, affluence would be the latent variable, the thing that is causing the other two things to happen.
It's like the wine, you know, people say that if you drink wine, you live a longer life, but it's, you know, having the budget of buying the wine.
Oh, I think that is true. If you drink wine, you live a longer life.
Because you're happier, probably.
I don't know whether it's true or not, but I'm prepared to
test out
wine just in case.
Chris is like, I will be a part of that study. Yeah. You let me know. It might be living in wine country makes you live a longer life. I mean, you're not very far from wine country, Chris. You've got some good wineries up there.
Actually, yeah. I live fairly close here to the Dundee Valley, down just there, where they make great Pinots. So,
Texas wine is not to be trusted. We will not live long lives.
Alrighty, so let's go ahead and just do a quick combination of both crosstab and correlation analysis. You know, like the perfect pair. What challenges have you encountered when using crosstab and correlation together?
Yeah, I mean, very often what we like to do is to really use the crosstabs as a precursor to correlation analysis, where we say, basically, when you look at the crosstabs, you might come up with a hypothesis. Like, you may see that there's some significant differences in age and how a particular question is being answered. And you would look at those and you'd say, okay, is there something going on here which is more linear, which is more can go this particular way? So maybe we would do something like, maybe we had a number of, let's say we were staying with the music theme. Let's say we had a number of artists, and where people were rating how appealing they found each of the artists, and that we saw that there were significant differences between the age columns. Then maybe we would say, okay, this is a great candidate for doing a bunch of correlations and saying how would we do that? So very often we would use the crosstabs as a way to identify areas where we'd say, yeah, let's run some correlation analyses there. We see that there are different that there are different changes across age of the appeal of these bands. What we'd like to know is there a way of describing that, and then maybe correlation analysis, do the correlation analysis. So we'd say, Kansas is a plus 0.3 and Youngblood is a minus 0.6, but that in itself will tell us how things are changing and what you would do in order to understand that relationship more.
Great. Any other commentary?
Okay, this is a question for both of you. Have you ever seen a product or a statistic or a decision go live and you were like, that person interpreted that data wrong, and it was like
I've seen, I can think of like some products where I'm like, how did they think this would be like successful? Like what kind of data were they actually collecting here? But I don't know. Chris, what about you? Do you have any examples?
Actually, I've been part of a study, and this was a number of years back. It was for an electronics product, a computer peripheral, and the company that created the peripheral, they wanted to know who their fans were, who the people who loved this. Okay. And so they did a study amongst people who owned it, and what they did was they wanted to prove that people who used their product a lot were the big fans and loved it, and the people who didn't. And so therefore they, in their head, and what they were going to go out with was a usage campaign to get the people who didn't use it very much to use it more, so that they would love the company more. Standard kind of thing. Except the correlation went in exactly the opposite direction. The correlation went that the more people used the product, the less happy they were likely to be with the company. and that was totally the opposite to what they expected. The correlation went the wrong way. And that was totally unexpected. And at first they said to us, you've got this wrong. And we said, no, this is definitely right. If we take the high usage group, we see that they rate you this way. If we take the low usage group. And when we dug a bit deeper, what became obvious is the people who didn't use the product very much were kind of happy with it because they didn't
know very well.
Right. And they didn't run into problems very often. The people who used it a lot were running into a lot of problems with the thing, and so this was one example of where they expected the correlation to be positive, that the more you used it, the happier, the more you would love the company. Whereas actually it went in exactly the opposite direction. There was a negative correlation, and the issue was that people who used it a lot ran into a lot of problems, and so therefore were pretty ticked off with the company. So that was one example where the direction of the correlation was totally unexpected. And they had to completely on the basis of that, they completely revamped their campaign. in the way they did that. They actually did a campaign that emphasized more their fantastic support and things like that.
Oh, that makes sense.
You know, so,
limit your usage with our product.
See how that happens though, because like even with Canva, I use Canva a lot and I know the ins and outs of it, but then when it does hit that, especially when they change it, you're like, why are you doing this? Or like HubSpot. Like,
right.
Like high active users know products so well that it's like the devil. At some point you get stuck in the devil I know.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh man, that's a good one, Chris. Good story.
I like that.
Okay. Well, that is heading towards the end of our live stream here. So if anyone has any last tidbits of information they'd like to give out, maybe a nice little wrap up of what crosstab and correlation analysis is with a nice bow, feel free.
Dan, why don't you give it a shot?
Use crosstabs.
Talking. We just sat here and listened to Chris for 30 minutes.
I know, it's so nice to hear Chris's voice. I mean, I think if you're listening to this, you probably know about crosstabs. You're probably using them. If you don't know what crosstabs are, definitely, Question Pro has crosstabs in there. There's help files and resources that you can go and learn all about them. Correlation, I think, is something you can also, dip your toe in if you need help. Obviously, we're here to help you. Chris and his team can do correlation analysis for you and help out. So crosstabs, correlation, kind of the bread and butter of market research. So that's what I would say.
Very nice.
I love it.
Chris, how about yourself?
Yeah, I would say the main thing, and this kind of is keying off of something that Crystal said earlier, is that go into it with a little bit of a plan. Go into it knowing how you're going to split your audience up, how you want to look at them, how you're going to report on them. Those are going to be the column headers in your crosstab. What the technical term is the banners. Okay, if people say the banners, that's what we mean. And that's not just any old question. That's what are the questions we're going to say. We're going to split our audience up into these groups and say, okay, how do over 40s compare with under 40s? How do users compare to non-users? Those kind of things. So go in with a little bit of a plan as to what's going to be there. You'll hear people use the term, what's your banner plan? That's what they're doing.
Very fancy term.
What's your banner plan?
And this again is going back to the fact that this is a very old technique. This has been around for decades. And they always used to call the column headers as the banners and the row headers as the stubs. So some old farts like me, you'll still hear saying banners and stubs.
All I think about when I think of banners is like people in the Crusades.
Yeah, like a
banners.
You're also limited on the number of banners you could have, right? So was it 15 or 16, somewhere around that number, I think, right?
Yeah,
something around that.
Right, and the reality is you don't want too many banners. Some people try and put in tons and tons and tons, and the reality is you end up with a set of tables that are just too complex to look at.
Right.
But if you start by saying, rather than throwing everything in the banners, just say, what are the main things we're going to be interested in? What do we think is going to make people answer differently? And maybe it's age, maybe it's region. Maybe it's their usage of the product. All those things can be things that can be in banners, but you don't want too many of them.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah. You're taking me back here, Chris. You're taking me back.
Yeah.
Danny and I have never been there, so it's all new to us.
One of my first jobs in research was proof. I had to proof crosstabs, go through each number and making sure it was right. And the banners and the stubs, this is taking me back down memory lane.
Yep.
Crosstabs still surviving into 2025.
Yep.
Alrighty, well, thank you guys so much for your time. If you guys have made it to
what is that noise?
It's still left over from the power going down. Believe me,
It sounded like a dial-up connection.
Oh yeah, I'm still on dial-up here in Round Rock, Texas.
Oh my goodness. Okay, we're getting derailed. Thank you guys so much for being on this episode with me. I appreciate your guys' time. For anyone watching at the very end here, if you're hearing this, you're my like extra favorite people. So thank you guys so much again. I hope everyone watching has a wonderful rest of their day.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.